I love to take care of people and have since I was 10 years old. So I knew from a young age that this is what I wanted to do.
I am a pathologist here at Lewis Gale. I was brought on when the center gained level 2 trauma status in 2023. I just told your producer like 5 minutes ago, we can't talk about that. We're not supposed to talk about it. It was an unfortunate incident. I am unable to comment further at this time as the investigation is currently ongoing. Do you want me to say it from different angles or something? Oh, right. So you with hair that's 3 shades of blue knows how to repair the motor in a mortuary fridge. How was I supposed to know the technology wasn't working? Beyond standing inside the fridge for a few seconds to check the temperature. Tell me something. Have you ever seen an appliance repair technician wearing one of these? No, you haven't. And you know why you haven't? Because I am not an appliance repair technician. Unlike your little YouTube channel, you have to go to school and work hard to earn one of these. You can't just smash an app on your phone and a scrub cap pops out. Not to mention, this scrub cap has my name embroidered on the back of it. And I have like 24 of these. Do you have anything with your name embroidered on it? Do you even know what embroidered means? No, actually, surprise, you've got that one wrong too. I kept my job here because they can't determine negligence on my part beyond a shadow of a doubt. Yeah, and it's not because I was having some inappropriate relationship with Angela with a member of the leadership team. You better have him edit that out. I am already walking barefoot on eggshells and broken glass in this place. And for the record, Mr. Influencer, nothing in my job description has changed. I still do exactly what I'm qualified to do and what I was hired to do here at Lewis Gale. The minor difference being, instead of determining what killed a person, I now determine what killed a movie, which is just as important, I think. How? And they're not silly little movies, by the way. Working here can get pretty heavy at times, especially for me being directly next door to the interventional radiology folks. It's nonstop chest port replacements for chemo and intravascular injections and intra-organ core biopsies and lots of real blood and pain. And it can be constant. And the folks next door in IR who have to deal with it day in, day out are the best kind of people. And it feels like every time I watch one of you YouTubers, you're complaining about how much the algorithm hates you or how hard you have to work. You don't know what hard work is. But they do. And that is why my stupid, irrelevant job is important. I get to keep them entertained with my stupid little videos, and I'm very proud to be able to do so. Speaking of which, I am done here. I have to go watch a movie. I graduated from U of V. Most of my degree was pathology, obviously, but the program was sponsored by Blockbuster, who were really big in Salem at the time. Welcome to my dojo. I'm not used to having people here while I'm working, but I'm sure we'll get through it just fine. It's a very busy time, actually. We get DVDs donated to the hospital, and I have to make sure they are viewable before they're distributed amongst the various departments and staff break rooms. Right back here in these drawers behind me, so far this week I've processed 1 missed call, and Slenderman today. Yes, I am processing The Invitation. It is 2 years old. Now, of course, you hate to see them coming in here that young, but you do get used to it. It arrived here dead on its feet with all the typical presentations of a flatlined modern horror movie. And my job is to determine exactly why it flatlined. Shall we? The movie opens rather dramatically with a young lady bringing her own existence to an end with some piano wire. And then we pop into New York City and meet starving artist Evie Jackson, who works a catering job with her best pal Grace. And after work, back in Evie's $4.3 million New York City studio apartment, we find out she's orphaned. And the art keeping her starving is clay pottery, which is surprising given how incredibly popular and fashionable clay pottery was in 1977. Maybe, if she can't shift enough of her pencil holders and flower vases to pay her bills, she could try doing some macrame next. At least in the meantime, we can all rest easy knowing her part-time catering job is probably more than enough to cover the monthlies in her 4,000 square foot downtown Manhattan apartment. Feeling a tad lonely and a little lost, Evie sends off a DNA test to find out if she has any remaining family members. And apparently, she does. He's British, his name is Oliver,
Oliver. He lives right around the corner, and Evie is excited to meet him. And then her best friend Grace does a real disservice to her name when she calls Evie's newfound cousin the whitest man she's ever seen. And then she suggests British people are only polite because they're masking their colonialist guilt.
When it comes to determining the specific cause of death for a lot of these modern horror movies, it can be a real challenge because there are so many potential culprits. However, in my experience, one of the most potent and common ones is divisive dialogue.
Generally speaking, people watch movies to feel uplifted. When a director presents something that evokes a negative feeling in the audience, it's akin to the story developing kidney disease. Most people will probably keep watching, and some may never know there was even a problem. But compared to a movie that chooses to ignore this low-hanging fruit, movies like The Invitation might leave you feeling a vague fatigue. Evie ignores her friend's dumb observations, and she meets her cousin Oliver. And he tells her her great-grandmother had a child with a black servant. And then he invites her to a family wedding in England. And when they get there, Walter, the Lord of the Manor, welcomes them both to Carfax Abbey. And for anyone unaware, Carfax Abbey is the name of Count Dracula's property in England as per the original Bram Stoker novel. And given this movie is building towards Evie finding out at the last minute these people are all vampires, this early decision to reveal the Dracula connection represents the first stake in the heart of the movie's long-term survival. As is customary in these sorts of settings, Evie starts seeing and hearing things, including the ghost of the woman from the opening scene. And then a shadowy specter starts snatching up the maids one at a time, and then Walter puts the moves on Evie. Then she finds out he'd researched her before her arrival. And being a woman of conviction and independence who will not be swayed by all the riches around her, she tells him she's leaving. But then she doesn't leave, and they have sex instead, which is a variation of declaring your conviction and independence. At least in 2024 it is. Moving into the rehearsal dinner scene, the film's confused messages regarding Evie's character traits probably have many members of the audience feeling lightheaded and anxious. And then, during the rehearsal dinner itself, when Evie thinks she'll be meeting the bride and groom, she finds out Walter and her are going to be getting married instead. And then the butler, who's named Renfield, and I'm not sure why, cuts one of the maids' throats, and Walter and two of the other obvious vampires, Victoria and Lucy, drink the blood from a bowl.
And this brings us to a vital point in terms of the movie's mortality, the information dump.
Instead of showing us what's happening from early on in this story, The Invitation chooses to tell us everything in the final quarter of the film's runtime.
And when this happens, the movie will often break into a cold sweat as a dull, achy pain shifts across its chest into its shoulder and down into its arm. And this movie's story lore is...
Evie's ancestors are among one of three families who've been offering one of their descendants to be Walter's wife for hundreds of years. In exchange, these families are offered wealth and protection. Protection from everything other than plot holes, apparently. The two girls, Victoria and Lucy, are his other two wives. The woman in the opening scene was Walter's third wife, but she took the piano string subway out of town because of the guilt of having to kill human beings to survive. So apparently Evie's ancestors were having a rough time finding a replacement bride, and then along came Evie, which might confuse you if you've just watched her take the DNA test voluntarily and track Oliver down herself. Evie manages to escape all the way into the town where she asks an elderly couple for help, but the elderly couple end up being Keanu Reeves and Winona Ryder. Jonathan and Mina Harker. And if you're thinking, wait a sec, the hell are they still doing alive? Or, fantastic, at least Evie's bumped into two people who'll completely understand her plight and help her, given Jonathan Harker went through this exact scenario when he was trapped in Dracula's castle. You'd be silly for thinking that, my friend, because they knock Evie the hell out. Likely because a weak writer would think having this famous couple do the last thing you'd expect them to do in a Dracula story would automatically make a good story twist. When Evie wakes up next to one of the maids, Walter tells us he is Dracula. And then Walter, who is not Dracula, bites into the maid's leg, and then Evie passes out again, only this time when she wakes up, she's in Las Vegas at a drive-thru Elvis wedding booth.
Oh only kidding. But at least the Elvis story would have been plausible.
Evie wakes up in a wedding dress during her own ceremony, which I'm sure has actually happened before. I doubt many of them were physically walking down the aisle at the time, but stranger things have happened. You might even consider it symbolic, given this movie's been dead on its feet for the last 20 minutes. And then without an ounce of kick or scream or bite or hesitation or even mild protest, the independent woman of conviction bites her new husband's wrist and voila, she's gone all instant vampy, like adding hot water to a pot of blood-flavored ramen noodles. And then she sets the place on fire and stabs Walter with a gigantic, conveniently placed and sharpened to purpose wooden stake. And given the obvious and well-known issues a sharpened wooden stake might present to somebody impersonating Dracula the way Walter is, the choice to have one right there would be the same as me decorating the main table at my own wedding with a bouquet of rattlesnakes. Then Evie and another maid jet out the back, only to be attacked again by Victoria, one of the remaining vampire wives. But as you probably already guessed, Evie survives because the other vampire wife, Lucy, arrives at the last minute and the two vampire wives do each other in.
You didn't guess that was going to happen. Neither did I, actually.
You'd assume Evie, our strong female lead, would have just beaten them both up with her brand new and unpracticed vampire powers, and of course, that would have been ridiculous.
But to have two powerful, centuries-old vampire ladies who both relished in their immortality suddenly decide to beat each other to death over a person they've just met? Don't bother with the ambulance. This movie is vital signs absent.
And then the also centuries-old Renfield has a go at her too. And this time they give us the ridiculous fight we've all been waiting for. They didn't let us down, folks. It was just a momentary postponement. And then Walter, who isn't Dracula, reappears looking like an old-fashioned designer who sat through more cosmetic surgeries than runway shows. And again, Evie does him in by cutting his arm off with some piano wire she had in her person, which is a fairly common traditional wedding day accoutrement, depending on the circles you travel in, and then she kicks him into the fire, again reminding us Walter is no Dracula, folks. Then we're treated to one of my favorite style of endings when we get to watch a castle burn to the ground in spite of the fact it's made entirely of stone.
And there you have it, folks, the plot to 2022's The Invitation, which happens to be a personal favorite of my colleague Bill in the IR department, I might add. I'm going to summarize my findings now so we can put this poor creature of a film out of its misery once and for all.
While it failed to maintain any level of actual movie health in terms of story and theme and pacing and tension, it was superficially healthy, which is to say the lady had flawless, beautiful skin tone and bone structure despite the fact you couldn't get a decent conversation out of her unless you were talking about makeup. From the costumes to the hairstyles and the settings, both indoor and outdoor, they shot a decent-looking movie. I can say the same for the cast. I have no issues with any of the individual performances. You can certainly attribute bad stories to the death of most of these modern horror movies lately, but you really can't blame the actors for that. The movie's star, Natalie Emmanuel, was perfectly suited to the role of Evie. Her face was expressive, her line delivery was spot on, and you certainly won't hear me complaining about her physical appearance. Having said that, nailing a film's aesthetic is no easy task, but there's no point doing all that work if you're not willing to give as much attention to the little details. At the end of the day, people notice them, even if they don't realize they are. The little details collectively paint the bigger story picture. Opening the movie with a struggling artist doing clay pottery in a studio apartment nobody I know could ever possibly afford takes people out of the story immediately. And that lack of attention to the details permeates this movie like a fast-acting virus. What exactly qualified Evie, Victoria, and Lucy's family DNAs as suitable to be the bride of fake Dracula? And why did he need 3 of them? And what was going on with the visions of the third bride? Was she planting herself in Evie's mind? Or was Evie seeing into the past? Or was it a haunting? When you decide which, if any of those it was, what was the purpose of the interactions? Evie wasn't offered any advice, didn't change any aspects of the story beyond providing the audience audience with ghost scenes. Also, throughout the story, Evie was hearing wolves outside, despite being told wolves have been extinct in that part of England for centuries. Also, why didn't his third bride, the piano string girl from the opening scene, simply kill fake Dracula, Walter? That woman had been stuck in that situation so long she felt compelled to end things. And that means she'd have been well acquainted with the fact the fire and the stakes and the old decapitation would have taken care of her husband immediately. I mean, after all, Evie, the clay sculpting part-time caterer with confused morals and ethics, figured all that out on her first day, right? And come to think of it, speaking of the decapitation, they kept hinting at it the whole movie, and that is a setup in film terms, but she never ended up doing it in the end. And as I joked earlier, revealing the Carfax Abbey name destroyed a potentially brilliant twist immediately. By the time the dinner happens, you're waiting for them to reveal they're vampires, and that's kind of the opposite of how a twist is meant to work. Here's the logic as I see it. You'll go to this movie if you're a fan of vampires, and if you're a fan of vampires, Carfax Abbey is a name so familiar it will ruin the surprise. And if they were counting on it being a great twist for non-vampire fans wouldn't really be going to a vampire movie, would they? Another also, in spite of Natalie Emmanuel's best efforts, her character arc made no sense. She went from a straight-shooting independent girl to a vengeful, ass-kicking vampire in the span of 2 scenes. With movies like this one, I don't ask myself why it's dead only 2 years after its release. I ask myself how the hell it survived long enough to end up on my radar to make its way here to my stainless steel slab for processing in the first place. So, should you watch The Invitation if you haven't seen it yet? Or should you do things the old-fashioned way and wake up married to a stranger in Reno like everybody else does?
Ultimately, as is often the case with these sorts of films, the cause of death is rarely a single bullet between the eyes. It's usually a combination of several things, and of course that can make it challenging to find one single cause to write on the death certificate. In my professional opinion, I'm not surprised this movie is dead with the critics, nor am I interested in a potential resuscitation with a second viewing at any point in the future. However, if you go into it with low expectations and you have a low standard in terms of what you expect from a vampire movie, go right ahead. You're an adult. As always, thank you for watching, and to Bill and all of my friends in the IR department at Lewis Gale, please keep up the good work. And as wonderful as you all are, and with all due respect, I hope I never ever wake up to find any of you hovering over top of me. Until next time, folks. It's me, Jonny, from that video you just loved, and I know you loved it because this book I read told me if I constantly say that to you, you will start to believe it's true. So thanks for loving that video you just watched. You're also going to love this next video as soon as you click on it. Click on it.